No, not yet.
Here we go. We're live.
Oh, there we are. We are live. Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on DojoLIVE, connecting with tech experts like you. My name is Kim Lantis, broadcasting from Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. Joining me is my teammate, Tulio Seragusa. He's in Los Angeles. Hey, Tulio.
Hey, good afternoon. It's a great
Hey.
day here in Los Angeles.
Perfect. So today we're in our second attempt to interview with Pedro Anderson, co-founder of Winding Tree. He is a blockchain and decentralized systems evangelist. Thank you for joining us again, Pedro. Sorry about last time.
No worries. Thanks for having me on the show, Kimberly. Great talking with you guys last time, and hopefully it'll be fun this time as well.
Perfect. I hope I see it's a busy day for all of us. We find Pedro traveling. Don't get car sick, Pedro. Perfect. So for those of people who may be joining us for the first time with you today, Pedro, can you quickly just tell us a bit more about yourself and Winding Tree?
Yeah, so I'm one of 4 founders of Winding Tree. The 3 others are developers. I come more from a project management and sales background in event technology and social entrepreneurship and hospitality. Winding Tree is a decentralized platform for travel distribution. So hotel bookings, flights being done without gatekeepers. So we make the connection between suppliers and the demand side without charging any fees. The code is all open source. And so a big part of our mission is promoting open source and promoting permissionless innovation, decentralization. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. So why is it that you're so behind this decentralization, open source? Why would you consider yourself an evangelist of such a thing?
So decentralization, in my opinion, changes everything. It's similar to the advent of the internet and the invention of the computer. I think it'll change society as we know it to that extent, if not more. And the reason for that is that for the first time in history, we have the ability to build marketplaces and businesses without the risk of monopolization. If it's done right, if it's truly decentralized. And that's really what caught my eye, the ability to create something that does not require you to trust an intermediary, to trust a third party, somebody in the middle, but rather to trust the community instead, right?
So what types of, what kinds of pros and cons do you see in that? I mean, either way, trust is involved, right? And either way, there's people and some people are good people, some people are bad people. So what would be the pros of trusting the community versus trusting an intermediary?
So the difference is that when I, let's say,
did this kind of freeze the bit?
Whereas the community doesn't necessarily have.
Pedro, I think you, just as you started answering, it froze up for a bit. Could you please start over? I'm sorry.
Sure, no. It's probably my fault being on the road.
That works even on the road.
Yeah, so there are 2 big problems with centralization, and one is that giving too much power to one individual, to one organization to play judge. Its natural inclination is to eventually corrupt and be focused more on maintaining your power rather than on innovating, right? And the second is, even if, let's say, Pedro is that intermediary and he's a great guy, he doesn't want to be malicious, he won't eventually do something wrong, you still have a central point of failure. You could hack into that central point of failure's computer and you could steal data. And so, as we've seen with major organizations, no matter how secure they are, right? So those 2 factors make centralized systems inferior to decentralized, in my opinion. But you mentioned, what's the compromise or the con to decentralization, and I think that the con to decentralization at the moment is. On the technical side, of course, it's a little bit clunky. If it is truly decentralized, it is a little bit slower, similar to the way that the internet was slow in the early days. I remember reading about attempts to create something like Google Hangouts or Skype back in the early 90s, which of course was a total failure with the state of the internet at that time. But today, nobody would think of living without it, right? So I think that the technical obstacles, and then the other is educating around decentralization. There's a lot of blockchain business as usual disguised as blockchain projects in the world today. On the corporate side, you have big corporations slapping blockchain label on products that have nothing to do with blockchain and selling it, and actually they're profiting the most off of it. And then you have small players seeing an opportunity to raise funding that they couldn't otherwise raise, saying that they're doing an ICO for any given item that has nothing to do with blockchain or decentralization as well, right? So I think educating around what decentralization is is one of the big challenges in it. So it's pretty exciting times.
It is. So I'm glad you brought up blockchain. That's a nice segue for me, because you actually chose the title for your talk today, how blockchain can disrupt travel distribution in particular. And we've already touched a bit on how it might allow us, or at least decentralization, to build a monopoly-proof marketplace. So as our viewers know, I'm not a developer, although I have been hearing this buzzword blockchain and cryptocurrency and all this stuff getting thrown around at seemingly very popular, seemingly all the rage right now. So for layman's terms and someone like me, real fast, what is blockchain? How does that fit into crypto investing? And why do you think that's the way of the future?
So if you look at how a blockchain was created, it was created for Bitcoin, right? But Bitcoin wasn't the first cryptocurrency. There were dozens of attempts at creating cryptocurrencies in the past. In fact, the very first computer was created for solving a cryptographic problem, right? And as soon as computers reached a critical mass in the 80s, there were virtual currencies created, right? But the problem was there were a few, but one of the big ones was the control that somebody would have to manipulate that currency that they create, right? And of course, there was security and so on. And a lot of those problems, the earlier problems, were solved. The technical problems were solved in the 90s, actually, right? But it wasn't until Satoshi Nakamoto introduced a peer-to-peer payment system known as Bitcoin that you removed every challenge to a virtual currency. You no longer had Satoshi. We don't need to know who Satoshi is. He does not need to be credible because the code speaks for him, right? And the code says that he does not have the ability to go and print more of that money the way that a federal government would, right? He can't manipulate that economy. And that's beautiful for currency, right? It allowed us to create virtual currencies, and there are a lot of them now. I don't know how many of them are good. That's a different subject. But the technology that allowed him to do that also allowed for the creation of computer programs that run on a decentralized public ledger. And that came a little bit later on with the likes of Ethereum by Vitalik Buterin, which is he created Ethereum Virtual Machine, which is like a giant computer. It's decentralized, and then you can run programs on it that cannot be manipulated, right? And those programs we call smart contracts. So the same way that when Satoshi created a virtual currency that couldn't be manipulated, couldn't be cheated, and so on, imagine creating a program that wouldn't be cheated and manipulated in that way. Let's say you created a marketplace or a social network, right? It's a big topic right now, Mark Zuckerberg. Let's say you created a social network that did not have access to people's personal data. You would not be able to change that rule later on. If that was a part of the rule initially, it would not be manipulable unless the community as a whole decided, Facebook users said, oh yeah, let's change that. Let's start giving away our personal data to governments and companies that want to profit off of it. And then you would be able to change it. But otherwise, the creator wouldn't have that level of power like they do now, right? With centralized. I think that there are a lot of exciting new ways of doing business that can be entered with this decentralized model where you don't have that manipulation power. Everything's transparent and open.
So Great. Go ahead, Tulio. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do actually. I want to jump in if it's okay. So we've been talking to a lot of travel tech experts this week, and one thing that's come up is how incredibly centralized that industry is still. What's the benefit, or let me rephrase that, what's the challenge that you see in terms of decentralizing and creating a more open environment? And how do you propose to go go about doing that? Can you walk us through sort of like, how do I benefit as a consumer from your platform? How does it work? How does that create a more decentralized environment?
Yeah, so what we're creating is we're creating a set of APIs essentially that allows for suppliers to list their inventory, make it available to any innovator, any point of sale, any website, any travel agent, anyone who wants to sell that inventory. And they can access that inventory and sell it themselves. We are not consumer facing. It's not a website that we control. It's a set of APIs that innovators can tap into, right? So we think that that will usher in a new era of innovation in the travel industry, because today a startup would need to go through one of those intermediaries to be able to access inventory, which naturally leads to double marginalization. It limits how many innovators can come in because you need to have special connections, and it goes contrary to innovation, right? So we're removing that barrier to entry and saying, hey, anybody who wants to innovate in the space can access that inventory, build a cool new tool, and start selling travel, right? Which for suppliers is exciting. They can sell their inventory alternative revenue without losing the inventory. In today's system, when they hand their inventory over to an intermediary, the intermediary owns that customer. They own that inventory. With Winding Tree, they still own the data on their customer, and they can personalize it more to that customer, it's a big change. We're doing this in a completely decentralized way. We're using Ethereum blockchain, like I said, so we don't have that power to manipulate. It's a nonprofit. It's open source. All the code's available on GitHub. Now, you asked, what is the biggest challenge to that? So the biggest challenge initially that everybody was saying is, a corporation, a major travel company, would never work with a decentralized system. They would never trust or open up like that, right? The open source, that's a dream, right? And that was until Lufthansa came on board. They came on board in September. They challenged that assumption that no corporation would ever, participate in a decentralized market like this. And Lufthansa came on board soon after that. A few others, Air New Zealand, Nordic Choice, and we'll have some other ones we'll be announcing in the near future. So the idea that corporations would not work with a decentralized marketplace was the number one challenge we were working with, right? It was saying, no one would ever do that. And now that's already fact, right? So we're working to expand that to others. So it's not just a handful of companies that are benefiting, but everybody, because it shouldn't be about, whoever gets in first is the only one that benefits, early incentives and all that kind of stuff. It should be about the entire marketplace, collaborating and working together to build the future of travel. And that's what we're trying to do now.
That's great. I think you and I spoke about this earlier this week. It's like you're a little bit of the anarchist of travel. I love it. So what's in it? Like what's driving all this for you? What's the end goal for you around this?
So for me, the vision I have for Winding Tree is 5, 6, 7 years from now is not for Winding Tree to be a massive corporation with 10,000 employees. My ideal of where it would be closer to World Wide Web or Linux, where you have a foundation that's kind of running it and very small, with a huge developer community contributing to it, corporations participating in building that, and as lean and small as possible, with as much of the influence coming from the community as possible. That's my vision for the project, and something that I can't wait to get to, right? But it's a lot of work getting there.
So where are you today? What's sort of on your roadmap for your platform? What success you've had so far? What would you consider your biggest win to date and your biggest challenges coming up as it relates to making this reality happen?
So the biggest challenge, the biggest accomplishment for me, I think, is the fact that we got the alpha version of the product on time. We tested it with hotels and they were successful. I think the next big milestone is getting the first few transactions that we're actually exchanging value between supplier and the end point of sale, because right now all of the tests have been on testnet. So I think the big next milestone that I'm really excited about in 2018 will be those first few transactions, and that's going to be huge. And then you have smaller ones like getting new partners, like I mentioned, the fundraiser that we did, where we were able to raise $16 million from the community. No VCs, no equity given away, no insane promises, nothing. Just completely community raised because they believe in the project and want to change the way travel's done today.
That's
exciting.
amazing.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So coming from a software development community in we have a lot of course, developers, a lot of whom are younger, and so this idea of blockchain, crypto investment, it's very interesting to them right now. So, and I believe too, the idea of decentralization, I think that might be a generational thing, or not necessarily, but it's exciting. So what type of tips might you give to our developers or people who are watching, how they could kind of move down this path? If, like, of learning more about blockchain, learning more about crypto investing, garnering that confidence among individuals, those types of things.
So I think it's two different things on the developer side and on the crypto investing side. I think it's two different games entirely. I remember when I started getting into blockchain, I was surprised to find that a lot of the developers who'd been in it for years, developing in it, weren't necessarily rich. I thought everybody would be a millionaire, because they've been developing in it for years, but they weren't doing it for the money. They were doing it because they actually believed in the technology. And I was initially drawn mostly by the technology itself and the removal of need for trust. And naturally, the profit comes along later when you're kind of like, hey, this stuff keeps going up, but it also goes down a lot. So I wouldn't give any advice to the crypto investing side. I'm not a financial advisor in any way, but on the technical side, I think that the first step is getting involved on open source projects like Winding Tree. We're looking for contributions from the community. We've had some open source development contributions. Some of the partners that we have, some of the airlines, they're contributing code. And I think that's a great way to get involved and learn about the technology while also building up your own credibility as a developer that is competent in the space, right? So contributing to open source projects, I think, is the number one. And if you're in travel, we'd love to talk to you. We'd love to have your support. And we're actually going to be organizing a conference later in the year. We have one in San Francisco, Travel Tech Con. We're working with, it's a very strong brand in the area for open source in San Francisco. And one of my co-founders is the co-founder of that conference. And we'll be organizing a Winding Tree conference in Europe together with that brand as well. And we're trying to get developers together, talking about the problems in the industry and solving those problems, right? So I think that's a great way to get involved.
That's smart. Thank you very much. So that we're on that topic, and I'm sure that we'll have this information loaded up on the website so they can get a hold of you. But what would that process look like for somebody who's interested in checking out your code and getting in touch with you?
So we have a channel on Rocket Chat that a lot of people are talking about the tech. That would be a great place to get started, and also our GitHub. It's all publicly available, so it's all open, transparent. We'd love to hear your feedback, hear your criticisms, your questions, and open the floor for discussion around that. We're all about transparency, and talk is cheap. Show me the code is kind of our motto from our CTO.
Right. I like that. Show me the code. Which brings me to one question. Business question. So I think it's one of those things where you can garner the trust with people who understand your code, right? Developers like you. Like, they can go in, they can read it, they get it, I understand, all right, that works. But how are you going about convincing people like me or the boards of directors and things of the companies you want to work for who can't look at the code, where you have to just say, take my word for it? How do you go about that?
Well, naturally, any C-level person would have a developer that they can work with to double check and reference, and I would highly recommend that. It was the same with when we announced the partnership. Some of the people in the community were like, "How do we know if the partnerships are real?" Right? For example, Lufthansa. And I said, well, with any organization, if you see a partnership announced, go check the actual source. Go check the company that they're claiming they're partnering with. If they actually partnered, you'll find something on their partners page or press page somewhere, right? So you go to the source and double check it. I think it's natural to do due diligence. And Any C-level person will have developers to go check the code. But beyond that, for executives in the travel industry, there's a huge opportunity in cost saving, cost reduction compared to what they're paying now to intermediaries. There is ownership of data challenges. There is cross-selling across the industry. So, for example, airlines selling hotel rooms at the end of checkout from their sites. That's pretty exciting stuff. So there's a lot of advantages to working with an open market like this that is easy and natural for a business person to want to get involved. And in fact, a lot of the support initially came more from the business side than even the tech side, believe it or not, from some of the travel companies I'm talking to, beyond just the partners that we have. Yeah.
Oh, Kim, you.
We lost you for a second.
I was muted. That's why. Julio, do you have any questions as we're coming to our final minutes here?
I'm curious. I mean, look, it's fairly new. There's been people in it for a long time. How are you finding the talent right now to work? Are you having to train people? What's sort of keeping you up at night as it relates to advancing the platform?
So that's a good question. So the reason why it's an easy one for me is because I'm blessed to have 3 co-founders who are developers and have been coding for years. So they have a lot of friends in the tech space. So Maxim Ismailov, he'd been in San Francisco for a long time. Jakub Wysoki, who's in Prague and he organizes PyCon, which is a Python developer conference. And Max was organizing TravelTechCon, so he knows a lot of developers there. And Augusto Lemble down in Argentina has been heavily involved in the blockchain community there, coding since the beginning of Ethereum. And Argentina happens to have one of the big hubs in the blockchain development space, right? So it's been a little easier considering my co-founders' influence in the tech space. So we're really glad for that. But of course, it's still hard. And one thing that helps a lot is that we don't just take talent from one city. We're a distributed team. I'm here in Texas. We have folks in San Francisco. We have in Lisbon, Portugal. We have in Prague. We have in Argentina. And so having a distributed team makes it a lot easier to pick the talent from the talent that you want without being limited by location, right?
Great. And how do you go about validating like new feature sets or functionalities? Is it driven by your partners, or are you kind of setting the pace and they're following along? How's that? How do you go about doing that?
So that's a good question. We work with our partners, and we've held workshops with them, and to get their feedback, extensive feedback, and really understand what they want. And we have a very powerful set of advisors who've been very heavily involved in deciding and helping us with growing the product because they've been in the industry. So Bill Niatlik, for example, was one of the founders and the CTO of Vayama, which sold, I think, for $500 million. So he knows the airline space, I think, like no one else in the industry. I could say. We also have a Doug Rice, who is very heavily involved in the hospitality technology space for years. He created HTNG, which a lot of the tech innovation discussions are held. He created it. And Norm Rose, who's been in the industry for years. He speaks, keynotes at a lot of the really major travel conferences and consults governments and corporations alike. And he knows both the hotel and the airline side. So having these heavy hitters on our advisory board, very actively involved. We have weekly meetings where we share our ideas with them. They give their feedback. Makes it a lot easier than if we were just trying to do this on our own as some young guys thinking that we know it all.
Great. So who do you consider like your biggest threat or competition? Is it a potential regulation, or is it actually the big travel companies that are putting pressure on not decentralizing? Where do you see your biggest sort of challenge moving forward?
I think the big challenge right now that I'm focused on is trying to get the enough partners to reach that critical mass fast enough to get the response, to get those transactions, like I mentioned. I think the tech itself is something that we're all waiting on, and we're doing some of our own testing and trying to find ways to optimize decentralized transactions to make them faster, cheaper. But waiting on the updates from Ethereum as well. Looking forward to those. So there are a few factors: there's the technology side, the partnership side. But they're exciting. Those are challenges that have to be solved. It's not optional, right? So we have to. It's the transaction speed and cost problem for Ethereum is not unique to Winding Tree. It's a industry wide problem. Not industry. It's a Ethereum wide problem, right? And getting both sides of the marketplace. It's natural for any marketplace that you're building. You need the buyers and you need the sellers, right? So
let's rewind a little bit. If you had to start over with all the experience and knowledge you've gained so far, what advice would you give to yourself and potentially to other people, other entrepreneurs who want to get in the blockchain game?
So my battery's going to run out in literally a couple minutes. So before it runs out, just wanted to say that, get it out. I would say that if you're going down the blockchain route, one of the mistakes we did was waste too much time talking to VCs and people who were in it, not for the promotion of the product. And I think that was a little bit of a time wasted. But I'm happy that we learned from that experience and focused more on the community and less on traditional investors for decentralized.
Oops. You're on mute, Kim.
Sorry, you're right again.
Looks like
the battery died.
Great advice, though. Great advice.
So great advice. I think it goes back to a lot of what Nearsoft is all about, right? Passion over monetary, passion over profit. So that's great. Cool. Well, sorry we didn't get to have a nice wrap up from Pedro. I really, again, want to thank him publicly for coming back and giving us that second shot due to technical difficulties the first go around. For those of you who are interested in knowing more, you can go ahead on our dojo.nearsoft.com website where you can rewatch this talk. And also we'll be putting up the information of how you could get in touch with Pedro and know more about what it is that he does as well. Very interesting. I like this idea, the anarchy, like you said. Very fun.
Yeah, I like it. Hey,
all right.
Thanks.
Well, thank you. Yes.
It was fun.
As always. Sorry, my background's very bright. I just realized. All right, cool. Well, thank you, everyone, and I hope that you join us coming up soon. Our next talk is scheduled for
tomorrow. We have another one tomorrow.
That is true.
All week long. It's a travel focus tech talks with a bunch of really interesting technical luminaries, as I like to call them.
Perfect. All right. Excellent. Well, thank you, Tulio. We'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone. Hope you join us tomorrow as well.